Mr. Mayor, we're now live. If you would like to open the meeting. Thank you.
Thanks, Lynn. Colleagues, welcome to this meeting. And can I ask everyone to keep their microphones muted unless invited to speak? And please have your mobile phones turned to silent. To assist with the flow of the meeting, can I ask all members to raise their electronic hand on the system to indicate if they wish to speak, to unmute their microphone when invited to speak, and to put it back onto mute afterwards, and to ensure that you turn your camera on and face the camera when speaking. Where appropriate throughout the agenda, I will ask members if they have any comments or objections. You may indicate this by raising your electronic hand. Where a motion has been moved and seconded, I will consider the matter to have the consent of the meeting if there are no objections, unless a formal recorded vote is requested. As usual, the council will be filming and recording this meeting, and it is currently live streaming. A copy of the film will also be uploaded to the Knowsley Council YouTube site in due course. Item number 1, minutes. The minutes of the annual meeting of the council and the special meeting of committees held on the 22nd of May 2020 are before you. Are there any objections to their accuracy?
Can I just ask Councillors Wynne and Councillor Stewart to put their hands down, as unfortunately they were up before you asked that question, so I just need to double check that they're not objecting. There's no objections, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma. Those minutes are agreed as a correct record. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Gemma, are there any?
There's no declarations of interest, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma. Item number 3, mayoral communications. 3A, mayoral engagements. The mayoral engagements have been circulated for information and for noting. Item 3B, leader and cabinet member announcements. I understand that the leader and cabinet members wish to address the council. Can I first of all invite Councillor Graham Morgan to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, before I go any further this evening, I'd like to take us through some time to acknowledge the ongoing impact that COVID-19 crisis is having on all of us. The pandemic has sadly already killed tens of thousands of people across the country, and as we know, a number of Knowsley residents are included in this. The latest figure I have seen is that we have lost 145 residents to this terrible virus, with many more local residents losing family and friends. Across the country, we've seen an increase in cases over the last week, and I'm afraid this has been the case here locally across the city region and Knowsley too. The speed at which we see spread is a reminder that now, more than ever, we all need to take responsibility for our actions and do our best to keep each other safe. Council, I'd like us to formally record our condolences to all those impacted by the crisis and the individual stories of loss and sadness. It's true that the pandemic has already caused suffering and upheaval for residents in our communities across Knowsley. I've said before, and I don't mind telling you again, that I've lost a few sleepless nights throughout this, and I'm sure that you can all identify with that. And it's true that we currently don't know how long we'll be living with this virus as part of our daily lives. Dealing with this crisis hasn't been easy, and I'm afraid it's not going to get any easier for a while yet. As we've seen over the last week or so, things can change extremely quickly, and we all have our part to play in looking after each other. By keeping ourselves and those around us safe. I know that we're all looking forward to getting back to normal life as soon as we can, but that can only be achieved if we all play our part in making ensure the virus does not spread. Mr. Mayor, you'll know that we've seen an increase in the number of infections across Merseyside and Knowsley over the last week or so. It is increasingly likely we'll have to put additional measures into place to help sure that we can reduce the spread any further, and that we can protect our local residents from the virus. Yesterday, we agreed to take care homes across the borough to stop receiving visitors to them. It goes without saying that this was not an easy decision, and I know that will be disappointing for the residents of care homes and their families, most of whom are already making a number of sacrifices to stop the spread. But now, more than ever, it's vital that everyone follows the guidelines and pays their part and help us overcome this, because that's the only way we can start to get back to normal again. Mr. Mayor, as I said, it won't be easy for us, and it probably won't be quick. But I have no doubt by looking after each other, we'll get through this. And this will be over, and we'll be able to get back to normal. I feel like I can say that with confidence, colleagues. Because over the last 6 months, this borough has continued to demonstrate how resilient it is. Throughout the crisis, Knowsley's communities reminded us just how caring and passionate they are. We've seen countless examples of our Knowsley Better Together principles in action. People of all ages, businesses, community groups and other organisations coming together to support each other in the face of huge challenges. And as remarkable and impressive that has been, I have to say that it comes no surprise to me whatsoever. As anybody who spends time in Knowsley would tell you, and I'm sure you'll agree, the strength and character of our community spirit amongst our residents is second to none, and it always has been. And it's the resilient community spirit and Knowsley Better Together approach which has seen us deal with head-on with this crisis so far. And it's the same approach that will help us move beyond this crisis in the long term. So this evening, colleagues, I'd like to take some time to formally recognise the contributions of the Knowsley communities through this crisis, along with the contributions of the Council's strategic partners. In a moment, I'll ask my colleagues, Cabinet colleagues, to join me in talking about specific examples across their portfolios. Before I do that, I'd like to sincerely thanking all the elected members for your ongoing community leadership over these last few months and your continued support of the work of the Council. And I'd also like to join in recognising the role that our town and parish council have played alongside us. As elected members, we've been fortunate enough to be chosen to represent the people of the borough. I know how serious we all take our responsibility, and your collective efforts the last 6 months have demonstrated. I'd like to make it clear how grateful I am for your hard work and commitment through this crisis. Thank you. I know that my cabinet colleagues are keen to speak this evening, so I'll start by handing over to Councillor Sean Donnelly, Deputy Leader of the Council and Council Member for Health and Social Care. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we all agree that COVID has had a profound impact on all our lives and sadly on all our communities. As the Leader says, the recent increase in cases locally is a stark reminder of how quickly things can change, how quickly the impact can be felt across the borough, and how quickly we'll need to work together with our partners and our communities to respond. The need for us all to remain vigilant and agile is more important now than ever. That's why we've agreed to ask care homes to stop receiving visitors, and that's why we're contacting more of our vulnerable residents to advise them of the need to follow the latest guidelines to make sure they keep themselves and others safe from the virus. As Cabinet Member for Health and Social Care, I want to put on record my deep appreciation to everyone who has made sacrifices over the last few months to protect their friends, family and neighbours from the pandemic. And I hope you all join me in acknowledging the hard work and dedication that the people of the health and social care have shown as part of that. The actions of the staff across the sector has nothing been short of heroic during the frightening times for many. Throughout the pandemic, we have truly seen the dedication and action. I've heard from across the entire sector, from hospital leaders, GPs, working in our community, care home staff and others. And I've been consistently moved by those stories about the care that they've shown to patients and the compassion and support they've shown to their families who've often been separated from their loved ones and waiting at home for news. We are lucky to have an institution like Wiston Hospital in our borough, a place that for many years has helped provide essential medical support to our residents and neighbouring communities. We are lucky to have expertise and support of the Knowsley-based GPs and specialists among our communities too. So I'd like to recognise the efforts of the doctors, nurses, healthcare assistants, the porters and others. These people have been amongst the many at the front line of the COVID crisis over the last 6 months. In recognising the work of our frontline health professionals, it is absolutely essential that we all also extend our deepest gratitude to the Knowsley care homes and their staff. I'm afraid to say that over the last 10 years, this government has neglected the care sector. Care homes have been under-resourced and the staff have been undervalued by successive governments. And sadly, this has continued throughout the crisis. The lack of resources and leadership from this government regarding PPE and discharge arrangements have created confusion and a risk for care home residents and staff and their families. So I want to pay tribute to all the staff in care homes, their hard work, dedication throughout the crisis, and the fact of those severe challenges. They've stayed in place to help support the borough's most vulnerable residents by providing care, company, and helping them stay in touch with their loved ones. In addition to formally recognising all elements of the health and social care sector for their commitment throughout this crisis, I'd also like to acknowledge the sacrifices and difficult circumstances which they've had to face at the same time. Many will have witnessed tragic and upsetting events at first hand, and we must not underestimate the impact this can have on them. So I'd like to take this opportunity to encourage residents, any member of staff who works in health and social care who needs help or support, even if it's just someone to talk to reach out to their friends, their families, or other support services available. I have absolutely no doubt that it's not for the dedication of the people across the health and social care sector we would have seen more fatalities in our community. And I have no doubt their commitment will continue to play a huge part in keeping people safe, both now and during the most recent challenges and in the future. And I want to take the time this evening to let them know that this council will continue to remain grateful for them. If I may, Mr Mayor, I'd now like to hand over to Councillor Maggie Harvey, the Cabinet Member for Children's Services. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Councillor Donnelly. I couldn't agree more with what you've just said. And thank you, Mr Mayor, for giving me this opportunity to extend some of my thanks for all the hard work and all the effort that's gone on in Knowsley throughout this period. Because we all know that for many local children, this has been a particularly confusing and even a frightening time, with the lockdown measures meaning that they were unable to spend time with their friends and with some members of their family. What we do for our children is one of our most important responsibilities. So I'm clear that our local response to the COVID-19 crisis has aligned that responsibility towards children and young people in Knowsley. It's clear to us all that what we do now in this time of crisis will have an impact on the lives of our young people in their years to come. And that's why I'm keen this evening for this council to formally recognise the efforts across our borough made in supporting children and young people over the last 6 months, made by an awful lot of different people, made by local schools and nurseries, made by parents and carers, made by social workers, made by a whole host of volunteers. The list is endless. So I hope you'll all join me in extending my sincere thanks to all of the teachers, all of the school staff and the support staff for their dedication in making the best of the huge challenge we faced, and for helping to provide some elements of normality to young people and their families during this troubling time. And I'd also like us to formally recognise the continued hard work of schools and their staff since those early days of the pandemic, including the support and guidance they've provided to those children receiving their exam results this year, particularly in the face of the confusion created by the complete fiasco arising from the government's allegedly mutant algorithm. And as we've started to see our schools reopening, let's also recognise their commitment to working with the council, trade unions, young people and their families to put in place the relevant measures to keep pupils, teachers, cleaners and all other school staff safe during the autumn term. And these efforts deserve to be acknowledged. Schools are already in Knowsley facing significant challenges as COVID-19 tests come back positive. But I can assure you all that we and our schools are doing everything possible to keep them and to keep the places as safe as possible. And finally, perhaps most importantly, I would also like us to formally acknowledge the role of Knowsley's young people and their families and carers throughout the pandemic. As I said earlier, this council absolutely recognises that the crisis has meant that your day-to-day lives may have changed. We're extremely grateful for all the sacrifices that you've had to make and for the role you're continuing to play in keeping us all safe by following the social distancing and other rules as you return to school. Mr. Mayor, I'd now like to pass over to Councillor Shelley Powell, the Cabinet Member for Communities and Neighbourhoods. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey, and thank you to Mr. Mayor. Over the last 6 months, Knowsley's collective response to the COVID-19 pandemic has been truly remarkable, and I'm delighted that we're able to recognise the specific contributions of our residents, communities and partner organisations this evening. I could not agree more with the leader's point earlier around the strong levels of resilience and community spirit across the borough. If anyone didn't already understand how important that spirit is, well, they certainly do now. It's played a vital role in helping our residents and communities respond to the challenges of COVID-19. Because, let's be clear, our Knowsley Better Together response has been absolutely phenomenal throughout. In March, 3 days before the lockdown was announced, we worked in partnership with organisations to establish a brand new Knowsley volunteer hub, which has helped so many vulnerable residents to access food, medication and household supplies. This is a great example of Knowsley Better Together in action and involves 60 officers from a number of organisations and community group representatives, utilising the resources of over 25 community groups and more than 300 volunteers. The Knowsley Volunteer Hub was set up at an unbelievable pace and could not have been possible without the hard work of a range of partner organisations, from Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service and Merseyside Police to Vibe, Live Housing, Innovate Knowsley, Volair, our local food banks and many more, all of whom provided time and resource to make sure that Knowsley residents could be supported. If I may, Mr. Mayor, I'd just like to invite Councillor Steph O'Keefe to provide her reflections about the role of Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. As Councillor Powell has said, the Merseyside Fire and Rescue Service played an active role in the implementation of the volunteer hub from the very start, typically providing a vital pick-up and drop-off service for residents, shielded residents who were in their homes at that point could rely on the fire service and the volunteer hub to safely provide their medical. This approach built on the long-standing partnership working between the fire service, the council and other organisations who operate in Knowsley, and very much provides a blueprint for our Knowsley Better Together approach. Alongside this work, the fire service also continued with its day job, of course, by remaining on hand to support communities and any emergency response required. Working together, we can best support local residents with their needs. Thank you, Councillor Powell.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Mr Mayor, with that in mind, I'd like us to formally recognise the role of all of these organisations and groups played in this work. The Volunteer Hub has made an enormous difference to the lives of our residents who would have otherwise struggled with lockdown. Without their efforts, the borough's response would not have been as strong and more residents would have suffered. Building on that, I would also like us to formally recognise the amazing efforts of each and every individual who volunteered their time and support to the Hub with the nation. As a result, the Volunteer Hub was able to ensure that residents had support with shopping and other tasks. People were on hand to help and advise on what the lockdown rules meant for households, and people were able to talk to somebody if they felt lonely. This is in addition to the thousands of small acts of kindness and compassion that have taken place across the borough. Between neighbours, friends and colleagues, I've been overwhelmed to see and hear about countless examples where I live, and I'm sure we all have. We'll probably never know the full scale of all of those examples, all of those chats across the fence, all of the texts to check in on a neighbour. But I do want to take this opportunity to formally place on record my thanks on behalf of this council to all of our residents for their part in helping Knowsley respond to the COVID crisis. I also want to recognise the continued support of all of those who've helped us remain safe in our communities in the last 6 months. This, of course, includes our colleagues at Merseyside Police, Merseyside Fire and Rescue, and the Knowsley Community Safety Team, who together have worked closely with communities to address any issues such as tackling illegal raves, providing support to those most at risk of domestic violence, and protecting empty business premises. Mr Mayor, I'd now like to hand over to Councillor Tony Brennan, the Cabinet Member for Regeneration and Economic Development. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Mr Mayor, despite the challenging circumstances, the examples we've heard about this evening are a true demonstration of our Knowsley Better Together principles in action. It is only right that we recognise the substantial contribution of our residents, communities, businesses and our strategic partners. In particular, I would like to extend my thanks on behalf of the Council to the registered housing providers and landlords across the borough for their support to residents and families during this period. We recognise that lockdown and social distancing measures made it difficult to deliver services for any of our organisations, but ensuring that provision for important repairs remained in place for tenants has been important, as has the broader advice and support they often provide for residents. As a councillor, and as Councillor Powell mentioned, housing providers work to support and did support the Volunteer Hub. I would also like us to recognise the contributions of our local businesses and partners in the private sector throughout the pandemic. As we've talked about, the impacts of this pandemic are sadly not just limited to health. We're already starting to see the effect that COVID is having on the economy and the impact on local people's jobs and their household incomes. As with everything to do with this crisis, the economic outlook is still unfolding. We just don't know what the future will look like. We don't know what the full impact of COVID will be. Alongside that, we don't know what Brexit means for our economy either. And the longer that the government remains unclear on their plans for Brexit, the bigger that uncertainty becomes for us all. What we do know, though, is that the last 6 months have been challenging for local businesses, with many having to shut their doors and make difficult decisions about the challenges ahead. What we also know is that despite the massive challenges they're facing themselves and the ongoing confusion from the government, local employers and businesses have stood alongside the council, our partners and Knowsley residents in providing support when it was needed the most, volunteering their time and providing their services, donating food and PPE. And I'd like us to place on record our sincere thanks to local businesses for their continued support in that regard. As for their commitment to supporting local residents going forward through programmes such as the Knowsley Apprentice for young people and the wider work of our Knowsley Works service. Even in the midst of this crisis, this council and its partners have known that it is important to keep a focus on our long-term ambitions. So we've worked with our appointed works contractors to make sure progress has continued safely across our key projects. This includes Kirby Town Centre, the Shakespeare North Playhouse and a number of highway schemes. More recently, we've seen the reopening of our town centres. As Councillor Powell said earlier, working closely with the police and others to make sure people can safely enjoy local shops, restaurants and bars whilst maintaining social distancing rules. None of these would have been possible without the hard work and responsible actions of businesses, various contractors, retailers, restaurants and bar owners. Not without the support of our residents who are loyal to our town centres. As I said earlier, Mr. Mayor, the context of COVID-19 is far from ideal for any of us, but it is important that we recognise the contributions and sacrifices that are being made by our partners and communities in order to address it. I would now like to pass over to Councillor Jane Ashton, the Council's Cabinet Member for Resources.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan, and thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to echo the words of my colleagues. Over the last 6 months, this borough has faced significant challenges in the face of COVID-19. And we've heard this evening how we would never have been able to face those challenges had it not been for a number of things. The hard work and dedication of the council and its strategic partners, the resilience, compassion and community spirit of our Knowsley residents, and collectively our determination to put our Knowsley Better Together principles into action when they were needed most. As you've already heard, this has enabled us to work in partnership to help ensure that our most vulnerable residents and communities have been protected from the pandemic. Each and every example this evening, each organisation, people, or each individual deserves to be recognised. I also want to echo the leader's words from earlier, thanking elected members for their role throughout this crisis. And if I may, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to extend our gratitude for the hard work of our Knowsley Council officers for their tireless efforts over the last 6 months. I've been fortunate enough to witness their total dedication firsthand for a number of years now, so it's not exactly a surprise. But I can't help but be impressed by how they've continued to go above and beyond, never shying away from providing the support that our communities need. This is evident throughout the entire organisation, from Mike Harden's executive team through to all Knowsley Council staff across all portfolios and services at every single level. And Mr. Mayor, I'd like us to formally recognise their contribution this evening. This is a big organisation, and it's no mean feat to respond to a crisis on this scale in such a robust and agile way, particularly given the constant changes and ongoing confusion, and in most cases the total incompetence of Boris Johnson's Tory government, which meant that on numerous occasions we had to step in to ensure that our residents were supported, and in many cases effectively creating new services from scratch. But I'm pleased to say that as a council, Our approach to business continuity planning enabled us to respond at pace. It enabled us to implement home working arrangements for around 2,500 staff over the course of 1 week. A tremendous achievement, Mr. Mayor, and a huge thank you must go to our IT staff for all their hard work. It enabled us to make sure that even though the most of our buildings were closed, our residents could still contact us and still access our support when they needed it most. And as Councillor Brennan says, as we look towards the future, the same approach will allow us to ensure the services can continue to be delivered safely for the residents in the most effective way possible. And despite the challenges we'll inevitably face, we will be able to realise our long-term ambitions for this borough. You know as well as I do, Mr. Mayor, this council is proud to stand alongside local communities in difficult times, and I'm proud to recognise the hard work of our officers that helps enable us to do just that. I'm even prouder to recognise the way this organisation has worked with its partners and directly with Knowsley residents to do it in a way that will make the most difference to their lives. I've said it before, Mr. Mayor, but I think it's worth saying again. They're all a credit to this borough. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if I may, I'd like to pass back to the leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Aston. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And colleagues, thank you for your time and your reflections. The recent mean that we all need to do our bit to make sure the virus does not spread further and that local residents can stay safe. But your comments this evening undermine to me just how strong this borough is and should serve us all as a reminder that by each playing our part, we will get through this. On that note, Mr. Mayor, there really isn't much more for me to say other than as leader of this council, reiterating my colleagues' sincere thanks to all our partners and their staff for support through this crisis. And as Councillor Aston said, to all our incredible staff within Knowsley Council for the sterling work they've done. And most important for me to reiterate once again, the borough's response to the COVID-19 would never have been possible without our local community. Without our residents, businesses and community groups who continue to show us the true meaning of Knowsley Better Together in action, I would ask that the Council's recognition and gratitude for all of that support is placed on the record. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Morgan. Colleagues, moving on to item number 4, public question time. No public questions have been received. Moving on to item number 5, partner presentation, update on policing in Knowsley. I would like to welcome Mr. Andy Cook, the Chief Constable of Merseyside Police, Superintendent Jennifer Wilson, and the Right Honourable Jane Kennedy, the Merseyside Police and Crime Commissioner. Can I now invite you to address the Council with your presentation? Chief Constable.
Thank you, Mr. And can I thank everyone and support and fully endorse the words about the people throughout our community of Knowsley who've done the right thing over the last few months. It's only by working together that we're going to get through this in the best possible way. So thank you to everyone there. I know we've only got a short period of time for this presentation, so you'll be very pleased to hear no grand speeches from myself. I'm going to pass straight over to Superintendent Jenny Wilson, just to give some detail around some of the excellent work and some of the challenges that my officers have faced across Knowsley over the last few months.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon and evening, colleagues. I'm just going to launch the presentation now that I would like to talk you through. So very shortly, you will see a presentation which will go live on your screen. Can anybody see that presentation yet?
Got it, Jenny.
Wonderful, thank you. Okay, so I'd just like to introduce myself first of all. My name is Jennifer Wilson and I'm the local policing lead for Knowsley. I started back in Knowsley in January this year, but I've worked in Knowsley previously as a patrol inspector, a neighbourhood inspector and also a chief inspector. So it was really great to return back to my old patch. This evening, I'm going to provide you with a short summary of what the last 12 months have brought in terms of challenges and success. The summary of the presentation will cover our priorities, a little bit of background and context, go through some of our demands, and then talk about crime levels, antisocial behaviour, how we've been tackling serious and organised crime, the fantastic partnership work that's already been alluded to by colleagues this evening, and then what success looks like for us. Obviously, this year we've reviewed our force strategy, which provides us with the vision for the next 5 years, very much aligned to the PCC's priorities, and you'll see that on the screen there. So in terms of the last 12 months, it would be remiss of me not to mention the significant impact that we've all experienced as a result of COVID-19. That's posed a significant number of challenges, including the pandemic itself, preparing for a second wave, challenges with the test and trace programme, and then a number of other issues in terms of major events, issues with regards to mental health, public unrest and protest demonstrations from Extinction Rebellion and Black Lives Matter, as well as the uncertainty about the pending impact of leaving the EU. So as always, we have to deal with business as usual, and a big part of that is about considering threat, harm and risk on a daily basis and making sure that we're allocating our resources to that threat. However, some good news, we are leading the way despite those challenges. We are the joint best performing metropolitan force in the country. We are the 4th best performing force, which is an improved position from last year. And we have retained our ratings by HMIC FRS. Of note, we're one of only 5 forces nationally who are graded as outstanding for tackling serious and organised crime. This slide just provides you with an overview of some of our daily demands and just some of the key figures in terms of we often experience 729 emergency calls, 583 non-emergency calls, on a daily basis provide support to 4,200 troubled families, deal with 365 crimes and execute 77 arrests. In terms of the context for Merseyside, there were just over 133,000 crimes across the last 12 months, and we have a solved rate of 18.8%. And actually, when you look at that in terms of our most similar forces and the national solved rate as an average, we are performing really well. We cover 249 square miles and a population of approximately 1.4 million people. So in terms of Knowsley, our population is approximately 149,000 and we cover 33.4 square miles. I have a local policing team of 3 sergeants, 18 constables and 22 community support officers, and we get support from targeted staff. And some good news later in terms of operation uplift, which I would like to share with you all, specifically around a new team to cover Kirby. So in terms of our priorities and our approach to visible and accessible neighbourhood policing, we dealt with 37,967 incidents, which was a reduction of 2% on the previous year. But within those incidents, 3.2% of an increase was about emergency calls for service. And we responded to those 70% of the time within 10 minutes, which is an improving picture in terms of our performance. They are spread relatively equally across the borough. You will note there our stop search figure of 4,439. which evidences our strong proactive approach and legitimate use of stop and search to target those criminals and individuals who are intent on causing harm to our communities. And when we've reviewed the analytical data in terms of ethical disproportionality, there's no disproportionality highlighted in terms of those stop and searches for members of the community who are part of BAME groups. We've worked really hard to establish our dedicated social media desk and launch the single online home. And within Knowsley, I'm sure you've all noticed we have a really strong footprint on social media in the region of 19,000 followers across both platforms. In terms of reducing crime and antisocial behaviour, we dealt with 13,104 crimes in Knowsley over the last 12 months, which is an increase of 6% upon the previous year. Whilst we've experienced reductions in serious acquisitive crime, we have experienced an increase of 17% in violence. And when we've reviewed that increase, what we note is it's mainly common assault offences, which occur particularly as a result of domestic violence. Domestic violence during the COVID lockdown period, we saw those increases in Knowsley as we did across the force and as was experienced by other forces nationally. In terms of antisocial behaviour, we increased by 23%. This was comparable with the force increase and was as a result of numerous calls with regards to breaches of COVID legislation and concerns from the community about antisocial behaviour. You will see from the slide that there's a slight increase in criminal damage, but also a 10% reduction in knife-related crime. And again, you will also see the increase in terms of the arrests, an additional 154 upon the previous 12 months, and an additional 2,136 stop searches. So overall, a very encouraging picture. In terms of tackling serious and organised crime, we had 17 firearms discharges in the last 12 months, which was an increase of 7 from the previous year. We adopt a robust approach to tackling serious and organised crime, and at the beginning of the year, not long after I'd taken up post, we had a significant dispute between two organised crime groups within the Kirby locale, which resulted in a number of firearms discharges. Lots of positive action, warrants and arrests and charges were brought against those offenders, and as we dismantled one OCG, we're working hard to make sure that we are understanding who those people are on the periphery who are working up to fill the gap left by that serious and organised crime group. A real positive that I'd like to draw your attention to is all the proactive work that we've undertaken as a result of tackling serious and organised crime has led to the recovery of 25 firearms, a range of firearms from revolvers, rifles, pistols and shotguns. What remains significant is our threat from organised crime groups, the risk of child exploitation, which we're starting to see across the borough, those people being recruited at a younger age to become involved in serious organised crime, and the risk around cybercrime. We've also worked tremendously hard to support victims and vulnerable people. And I know I've previously mentioned we've experienced an increase in domestic abuse, and our Protecting Vulnerable People unit are working extremely hard to work with those who are at risk of domestic abuse to ensure that they are safeguarded and that we're bringing those offenders to justice. We have seen a reduction in the number of missing people, and our work in this area continues with teams supporting local care homes and providers and our missing person unit working extremely hard to understand the risks around children who are looked after and in care, so we're in a better position to respond. Identifying high demand generators is really important. What that enables us to do is make sure that there's appropriate support in place to help those individuals at the earliest opportunity to ensure that they've got the support that they need. And the work of the local policing team and the crime and communities team and our extended partners have been vital to our success. In terms of tackling and improving road safety, it's a positive picture with a 20% reduction in road traffic collisions. We as a local policing team support all force road traffic initiatives and often work with our specials, colleagues from targeted and also our cadets to assist to make sure that we can do as much as we can in support of this priority. So what does success look like? So starting from the top, and I hope you can read the writing that's on the slides, Operation Brookdale. So we all know scrambler bikes are the chosen methods of transport, often for offenders who are involved in firearms discharges. They are also a major contributing factor to antisocial behaviour. And this year we have seized 103 bikes, mopeds and scooters that were either stolen or being ridden antisocially. We had the Kirby Together event, which is a participatory budget event where we allocated £25,000 worth of violence reduction partnership funding to 15 Kirby community groups in support of tackling and preventing serious violence. We hold our regular Walkabout Wednesdays with our partnership, which is really important that we're visible, out engaging with members of the community to understand what the issues are impacting upon them to help us inform an appropriate partnership response. We've had several closure orders granted for premises used in connection with criminality and antisocial behaviour, and we launched Operation Loki, which was an operation designed to tackle serious and organised crime within the Kirby location, targeting offenders and protecting the vulnerable. We've worked very hard to launch Operation Target, which is a borough-wide initiative focused upon reducing serious violence and knife-enabled crime. This results in a number of activities, including stop searches, road policing operations, test purchases in premises, open land searches and warrants. All in all, that work has led to the recovery of 172 weapons off our streets. We also launched Operation Viper in support of the emerging nighttime economy within Prescott and the investment and the cultural offer, particularly with regards to the development of the Shakespeare of the North. So actually, when you consider, this is just some of our success, I think you'll agree it's a great picture. So how do we develop our communications with members of the public? So we've used Facebook and Twitter to interact with members of the public and have over 19,000 community members where we engage with them and tell them where we are and what we're doing. We've invested in the refurbishment of Halewood Police Station and held community cafes. We've continued to work in partnership with the Crime and Communities team to tackle key issues across the borough. And I know I've already spoken about Operation Loki, which was the Kirby initiative, and I've already mentioned Operation Target, but we have also launched Operation Waterbury, which focuses upon serious and organised crime within the Heighton location. We've also launched Operation STEAM, which is focused upon criminal exploitation of children and young people who are being enticed to join organised crime groups within that locale. A key part of tackling serious and organised crime is about breaking the cycle of offending. It's about identifying those young people who are on the cusp of offending or the periphery of organised crime and trying to engage with them in a way that you can divert them from engaging in that activity. Operation Overwatch is a key method that we've launched with the Knowsley Council. We've also launched a vulnerable children's meeting, which is all about identifying those children at the earliest opportunity to make sure that we as a partnership can intervene those children at risk and safeguard them. I'm now going to show you, hopefully, if the technology works, a short video of actually what some of this work looks like in practice. And I hope you will be able to hear the sounds as I do this. Okay, I think there was a slight delay in the sound there, but hopefully you managed to enjoy that short video. But how do we actually know that we are getting it right? So we've worked extremely hard to engage with our communities on social media and listen to their concerns and needs. We get some fantastic feedback on our social media platforms. And we also know from our user insight that 75% of Knowsley victims are satisfied with the whole experience of dealing with Merseyside Police. And whilst I absolutely acknowledge there's room for improvement, I think that's a really positive picture. We've tried some new and innovative ways to engage with people using Facebook Live. You said we did, and making sure that we're showing the community that we're listening to their needs and we're where we need to be when they need us. So what does the future hold? Well, we've already spoken about the significant COVID-19 response and recovery challenges and the impact of organised crime. We've also seen a significant increase in mental health demands, and I think with the impact of COVID moving forward, that's going to remain a significant challenge for us. There's the risk of continued budget cuts and the cost particularly on partner organisations as a result of COVID-19, whilst we all strive to continually improve. In terms of Operation Uplift that I mentioned earlier, we have invested as a force in the creation of a Kirby community team, which will mean that I'm delighted to have an additional inspector, 3 sergeants and 18 constables to put towards tackling community threat, harm and risk. We have also invested in our Safer Schools officer posts, which will now be established posts within the Knowsley community policing team. In terms of the future, the need to make sense, I suppose, of an ever-changing complex landscape, the need to be alive always to what's on the horizon to ensure that we're in the best position possible to respond and continue to deliver the best service that we possibly can. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. Jane, is there Jane Kennedy? Is there anything that you'd like to add?
That's been a really comprehensive presentation. I think you may well be concerned about the constantly changing environment of regulations that the police are working with local authorities like Knowsley to make sure we understand what is expected of us, of the force, and anything that I can ever do to assist with Knowsley Borough Council and Merseyside Police, I'm always ready to do so. This is an extremely difficult time, and I think we're going into a repeat of what we've come through. Hopefully, although there's no indication that it will, there will be better messaging. I'm afraid there's real concern around the test, track and trace. All of these things might impact upon all of the emergency services and the resilience across Merseyside. We're in really difficult and uncharted waters, and I think the message you're giving that we need to remain alert and be aware and work together more closely than we've ever done before. I think there's nothing more than that I can offer at this moment. Happy to answer any questions if people have them.
Very well. Thank you very much, Jane. On that note, can I ask members who wish to ask any questions to raise their electronic hand? Are there any questions from members? Gemma?
Yeah, we're just having a look now. Councillor O'Keefe has her hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Gemma. And thanks, Jennifer, for that presentation. It was really detailed and comprehensive, and there is some great work going on there. It isn't necessarily linked to COVID or any of the measures that I'm taking with regard to that, but I do still think my comments are pretty timely. You mentioned how there's been an increase in the use of stop and search and how that's a good thing, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think it's important to consider any success of stop and search alongside any possible negative effects, particularly with regards to the police's relationship with our community. and the disproportionate use of stop and search on BAME individuals and young people in light of the Black Lives Matter campaign in particular. It would just be really interesting if I don't know if this is possible, but if we could be provided with some details of what the outcomes of those stop and searches were, and maybe some details on who were being stopped and searched. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor O'Keefe. Any response? Jenny, Chief Constable?
Mr. Mayor, if I can respond. We do an awful lot of work around stop search in this county. I unashamedly push it hard with my staff because we are seeing some really positive results in relation to it. We do more stop searches as a county than any other police force outside the Metropolitan Police. Our complaint rate in relation to stop search is 0.03%. Our disproportionality is the best in the country. Let me give you an example. Over the last 3 months, we stopped approximately 14,000 white males and females, and we stopped about 750 males and females from a black and minority ethnic background. That is 2.4 per 100,000 for white and 2.5 per 100,000 for people from a BAME background. We use the community throughout this to ensure that we're doing the right things. Last year, I invited in the National Black Police Association together with Liberty, the civil rights group, and Stopwatch, who are the national group who monitor stop search. I gave them free rein to Merseyside Police for 3 days to go and visit what they wanted, to watch what they wanted, to see how we did stop search, to speak to our communities, particularly around the Toxteth and Wavertree areas. They released a press release following that to say that Merseyside Police were best practice in the country. They could find no evidence of disproportionality in what we were doing, and wished other forces did it the same way as we did. We are seizing an awful lot of knives. Sadly, an awful lot of young people are carrying knives. I will continue to unashamedly target young people who are carrying knives because they are killing other young people in our communities. We've seized numerous knives and guns and other offensive weapons. We have arrested numerous burglars and people breaking into vehicles around Knowsley and Liverpool and the Wirral and the rest of the county during that time. It is not an exact science stop search. Mistakes will be made. However, as I said before, our complaint rate in relation to it is very low, and the vast majority of our communities, when we speak to them, ask us to do more, not less.
Okay, thank you for that answer, Andrew. Gemma, is there any further questions from anybody else?
There is. Councillor Kai Taylor has his hand raised.
Councillor Taylor?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. I'd like to thank the Chief Constable and Chief Inspector Wilson for the presentation. I never usually shy away from criticising Merseyside Police when I feel it's appropriate, but I would actually like to commend them for the work over the past 6 months. I can't begin to imagine how difficult it must be to police new laws and legislations that are brought in with a few days or even in some circumstances a few hours notice. And I'd like to echo the comments that Chief Inspector Wilson made regarding the communications from the police, particularly the Knowsley Policing account that has been incredibly responsive to residents' inquiries, and it is really proactive with posting regular updates. I'd also like to just place on record my thanks to Joanne Matthews, who works with the Crime and Safe Communities team as a police council kind of crossover. I know that from conversations with residents, she's really went above and beyond in a role to work with and support vulnerable residents, and I do hope that the Crime and Safe Communities team can continue that. One concern that I did have from the presentation was obviously on the use of stop and search, and it's an incredibly divisive topic. You know, we know it has good results, and I absolutely cheer the Chief Constable on his efforts to tackle knife crime in the area, and hopefully we'll continue to see more arrests in relation to that. One thing I would point out is that he mentioned the lack of complaint the complaint percentages and how very few people tend to complain about it. But we do know that these communities that are disadvantaged by stop and search are very unlikely to engage with, an official police complaints process. So I do apologise he's already given these figures, but just to reassure people who are concerned about stop and search, which I'm sure is a great deal of members, I know Councillor O'Keefe just mentioned similar. Does he happen to have a percentage of how many stop and searches lead to arrests, or would he be able to maybe provide that in an email to councillors if it's not something that he's got to hand?
Thank you, Councillor
Councillor.
Taylor.
So, Mr. Mayor, thank you, Councillor, for the praise. It's warmly welcomed. Yes, more than happy to do so. Stop search across Merseyside, somewhere between 25 and 30% have positive outcomes. That means that 70% don't. I fully accept that. As I said before, it's not an exact science, and we are very careful about the way that we do it. All our stop searches, 90% of our stop searches are done on body cam. That has in itself reduced an awful lot of the complaints that we used to get once people have watched the video of actually what the conversation was with the person who's being stop searched. We pay an awful lot of attention to, we have community members who come in to view those videos as well as part of our approach, and we're totally open about it. So roughly 25 to 30% end in a positive outcome, and community scrutiny is there.
Okay, thank you, Chief Constable. Gemma, further questions from elected members?
Yes, from Councillor Morgan. Councillor Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And also, I just echo the excellent presentation that Superintendent Jen Wilson done there. And also, on behalf of the Knowsley residents, thank you for the last, especially not just the last year, but the last 6 months have been really testing times, as Councillor Taylor said. I'd be so most surprised, Chief Constable, would ask then, we're chair of the Outbreak Management Board within Knowsley, and who knows which direction we're going to go in the next few days, not just Knowsley, but as a city region. And bearing in mind that new powers are being given to you on enforcement over COVID-related incidents, what would your view be for the future on enforcement and fines?
Thank you, Councillor. We will continue to engage, educate, and use enforcement as a last resort, but we won't shy away from using enforcement either. It's quite obvious. Most people, when you explain to them why they shouldn't be doing it, desist. Some don't, and they will have enforcement. Anyone who organises any large-scale unlicensed music event or similar, we are quite happy to serve the highest fine of £10,000 in relation to that, because the dangers that brings. But we need the community's help. A lot of this is about self-enforcement. A lot of this is about all parts of our community working together. I know we've had some issues around the Asda in Knowsley recently, and some complaints in relation to that. I've spoken, not personally, we've spoken to the manager there. I'm attempting to speak to the head of security nationally for Asda. Most of our retailers, most of our licensees are doing absolutely the right thing. A small number need to do a bit more, and we'll be encouraging them to do a bit more. And if we need to enforce them to do a bit more, we'll enforce them.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Gemma, further questions from elected members?
No, could I just ask all members who've asked questions to put their hand down, just so we can make sure that nobody else wants to ask a question, please? There's no additional questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma.
Thank you.
On behalf of the Council, can I thank the Chief Constable, Superintendent Wilson, and the Right Honourable Jane Kennedy for their attendance and presentation here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Moving on to item number 6, joint authorities. No questions have been received. Moving on to item number 7, members' question time. Can I invite Councillor Christine Bannon to ask her question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can the leader please give members an update on the recent activity of our adult provider services? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And thanks to Councillor Christine Bannon for the question. Could I ask Councillor Sean Donnelly to answer the question? Thank you.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Bannon, for your question. Colleagues, Knowsley Adult Provider Service continues to be a service that provides high standard of care and support to our most vulnerable residents. Over the last year, we've been formally recognised by 2 externally regulated inspectors for supported accommodation services and an evaluation of adult day services. In particular, following the inspection in April last year, the Care Quality Commission awarded the outstanding rating for supported living and shared live services. This was noticeable achievement, as only 2.5% of all the community-based adult provider services across the country hold such rating. And if that wasn't enough, there was followed by the Reablement team receiving a Care Quality Commission good rating in November 2019. More recently, our adult day disability services have been awarded a full accreditation from the National Autistic Society for their overall quality in their Autism Pacific services. This is the 3rd time in 8 years that they've received this accreditation. Throughout the inspection and the evaluation process, the accreditation panel recognised how the services was truly integrated and acknowledged that the staff were ambitious for the people. Such are the standards that have been achieved. A recommendation was made for the service to apply for the advanced accreditation status. This was an award that not only a small number of services nationally are given the opportunity to submit for this award. The opportunity has been offered to Knowsley based on the consistently high level of individualised support, care and guidance and the service that currently delivers. It is therefore a great source of pride in the Council that such an excellent specialist service, designed and managed by the Council, is being delivered for the benefit of Knowsley residents. As you'll be aware, as a result of the pandemic, adult provider services had to reduce its offer to allow to operate in line with the government guidance and ensure COVID compliance and safety. The supported living network houses and shared live provisions have remained fully operational throughout. I'm also proud to confirm that 2 day safe spaces and 1 autism hub have remained open during the period, and 1 is currently offering a 7-day service for them residents. This is in contrast to many other areas where all their services of this nature have closed in their entirety. Additionally, respite care beds have been utilised to ensure that the crisis provision is available when required. The services have been targeted at those with the highest needs, and this has been supported with carers and supported carers and prevented breakdown of care and possible admissions into permanent care settings. Contact has been maintained with service users and their carers who've been away from their services to ensure that people have felt supported to keep in touch with any changing levels of need or emerging crisis. Adult providers continue to work closely with adult social workers and review teams to ensure that the service users and their families are supported and assessments and reviews are undertaken. Colleagues, please be assured that our focus will remain on adult provider services, continue to transform and develop specialist services for the people with complex needs, which is in the most highest quality. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Donnelly. Moving on to item number 8, notices of motion. Item number 1, use of animals at council events. Councillor Joanne Burke, would you like to move this motion?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would like to move motion 1, use of animals at council events.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Councillor Shelley Powell, I believe you wish to second the motion.
Happy to second that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. Councillor Joanne Burke, do you wish to speak on the motion?
Yes, please. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got a couple of photos, but because of the time delay, officers are not able to share my screen to show them. So for one night only, we're back to the old-fashioned show and tell. So please bear with me. Firstly, I would like to thank the residents, and in particular Liz Sullivan, who brought this to my attention. I admit to having been ignorant to the use of reindeer and other live animals in our towns for entertainment. I acknowledge that Knowsley Borough Council have traditionally brought live reindeers to our towns in the spirit of Christmas and in the misguided vein of making a lovely experience for the children. I'm also aware the reindeer provider from North Wales used by the council was compliant with DEFRA regulations and carried all the relevant animal movement, performance and insurance documentation. When I wrote to officers last year asking them to not use the reindeer in our town centre at Christmas, I was told these reindeer live in stunning Welsh border countryside, complete with 50 acres of hills, lakes, freshwater streams and grazing paddocks. This is where I believe they should stay. Not in our town centre. Instead, reindeers are being used for hire all over the country, with advertisements declaring they will bring your event to life at shopping centres, sleigh pulls, weddings, fairs, opening parades, Christmas light switch-ons and public events. This can cause a huge amount of stress on the reindeer in the suffering they experience being transported, experiencing loud noises, excited crowds and being in enclosed small pens. No event in a public place can fully anticipate or manage the amount of people who attend these events or the noise levels they will produce. Reindeer can already suffer from the unnatural habitat our country provides, let alone the damage to hooves caused by the solid ground they're exposed to. Look at this gentle creature laying on a concrete pavement. The children's fable of Christmas and reindeer, which pull Santa's sleigh, obviously isn't intended to promote animal cruelty, but children are exposed to the exploitation of animals for human use from a really young age. As children grow up with this idea, it can be very difficult for them to see the reasoning and logic of why animals shouldn't be involved in circuses or shows as adults. Thankfully, Christmas events can still be great fun for children and adults alike, and can be made engaging and festive without live reindeer or other animals. Peter Egan, the Vice President of the RSPCA, says the use of reindeer within Christmas activities is inhumane and shows a poverty of imagination. And I agree, but I also happen to know there is no shortage of imagination in Knowsley. Indeed, in December 2019, I attended a fantastic Christmas Light Switch-On event in Prescott, organised by this council, where an ingenious elf cycled children and families up and down the high street in a sleigh. It was brilliant. And then there was the Snow Globe event, with families able to go inside and take photographs, both delivered by this council, along with the Prescott Town Council Christmas Cracker event, which introduced a massive inflatable Rudolph. All of these events were enjoyed immensely by our community, demonstrating that Christmas can be magical and fantastical without using reindeer or other live animals to entertain. With organisations including Animal Aid, People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals and the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, all encouraging us to avoid events that use live animals, we as a council have to listen and protect these majestic beings. The idea of reindeer as an inextricable part of Christmas is embedded deep in our culture, but it's one thing to find them in a storybook and quite another to use these very real, sensitive animals in what for them can be stressful transportation to a stressful environment as props for our entertainment. The director of People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, Elisa Allen, said, "What could ruin the magic of the season more than seeing stressed animals confined to cramped pens, tied up or harnessed, or forced to pull people round on sleighs? Reindeer are intelligent, gentle animals who are meant to roam free over vast ranges, not be carted up and down the country as if they were mere props to be paraded about and gawked at." Peter encourages everyone to extend compassion and goodwill to all in the festive season by avoiding cruel events that treat animals like Christmas decorations. I'm asking this council to extend their compassion to all and cease the hiring of reindeer or other animals other than those noted in the motion for public entertainment purposes anywhere in Knowsley. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Councillor Powell, do you wish to speak on the motion?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, I'm very happy to be speaking in support of this motion this evening. The welfare of animals has always been a priority for this council, and stringent protective measures are already in place whenever animals are used as part of any events taking part within the borough. Although there are limitations on what the council is able legally to do to prevent organisers from using animals for non-council events, we are able to control if and how animals are used in the events that the council organises. It is apparent that a pragmatic approach is required, given the potential educational value of some events that use animals. Indeed, the RSPCA has confirmed that the use of animals in some instances can be a positive step towards ending cruelty towards animals in the future. I believe that this motion recognises the instances where the use of animals can be educational or assist with conservation, and ensures that for council organised events, animals are not used merely for entertainment purposes in a manner which may put their welfare at risk. I would therefore urge members to support this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Powell. If anyone wishes to speak on the motion, can you please raise your electronic hand?
Mr. Mayor, can I just ask whether Councillor Stewart and Councillor wish to ask a question? Their hands were up relatively early, but I'm not sure if that is in an error. If they could put their hands down and put them back up again if they wish to, I would be grateful. And in the interim, Councillor Taylor wishes to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to commend Councillor Burke and Councillor Powell for bringing this motion to the council for consideration. It's refreshing to see a cross-party collaboration on something that is clearly a topic that a large number of members of the public and residents and council members feel very passionately about. This has been a piece of policy that I know Councillor Burke's been pushing for almost 10 months now, and it's good to see that when efforts are made to work in a non-partisan manner, compromises can be reached and solutions can be found. I strongly believe that no animal should be made to endure stress or suffering, and whilst the council is limited in terms of what we can and can't refuse from a licensing point of view, we can and we should lead the way as an organisation to ensure we are not financially supporting the exploitation of animals. Thank you.
Gemma, any further questions from elected members?
No, there's no additional questions, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma. Councillor Burke, would you like to respond before I put the motion to the vote?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd just like to take the opportunity to acknowledge Councillor Powell's motivation to work together in supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Burke. Colleagues, the motion is being moved and seconded. Are there any objections? Gemma?
There's no objections, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma. Would anybody like to abstain? Yeah.
No.
There's
no. Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure whether you heard that or not because my sound kept going on and off, but there's no abstentions.
Okay, thank you, Gemma. Colleagues, on that basis, the motion is carried. Item number 2, planning the white paper. Councillor Brennan, would you like to move this motion?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to move that motion, please.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Lonergan, I believe you wish to second the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I formally second that motion, please?
Thank you, Councillor Lonergan. Councillor Brennan, you wish to speak on the motion?
Yes, please.
Very well.
Yeah, thank you. Colleagues, in front of Council tonight is a motion opposing the government's white paper on planning reforms. Having considered this white paper and having got beyond the Prime Minister's usual enthusiastic bumbling rhetoric, the majority of the proposals in the paper are most concerning, with only a handful of suggestions being what I would consider necessary and beneficial. If ultimately approved, this white paper will without doubt reduce local democracy. It will erode our residents' ability to have a meaningful say on planning applications when they are submitted, as the decision will in effect have already been made at a local plan and setting stage. I, for one, do not want to see the local democratic oversight and public scrutiny by our residents of planning decisions eroded by this government. The government's claim that reforms are needed to speed up the planning process, reduce bureaucracy and bring forward development. Colleagues, the suggestion is that the planning system is broken. Clearly, in drafting this paper, the Tories have no knowledge of Knowsley, or indeed other areas such as ours. Our recent growth and development success is proof that the system is far from broken. In fact, rather than being a barrier, I firmly believe that the current system, as enacted here in Knowsley, is an enabler. Via this white paper, local control and influence will be passed up to number 10. It will be the government that say how many houses we need to build. They will impose design standards upon us, and they will also tell us how much we should seek from developers in mitigation, decisions that they will make with little or no knowledge of our borough. With this in mind, I move members to support the notice of motion before then this evening, and support this council in robustly and comprehensively responding to the government's consultation on the white paper's reforms, setting out our objections. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Lonergan, do you wish to speak on the motion?
I have nothing further to add to the excellent comments made by Councillor Brennan. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lonergan. If any other members wish to speak on the motion, can you please raise your electronic hand?
Councillor Taylor wishes to speak, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma. Councillor Taylor.
Councillor, if you're still on mute.
Apologies, Gemma, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can, yes.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll be the first to admit that I believe our planning process is in urgent need of radical reform. The current process places far too much power in the hands of councillors and multi-million-pound developers and offers our residents very minimal involvement in the planning process. The current planning process is not delivering nearly enough affordable housing. It's allowing substandard homes through permitted developers' rights. It's leading to an accumulating backlog of unbuilt planning permission. It's clearly not enough to respond to the climate emergency, and it's perpetuating car-dependent development in an era where walkable, healthy neighbourhoods are ever more needed. I think it's grotesquely unfair that local authorities that have been decimated financially by the central government cuts are constantly under threat of legal costs whilst trying to reach the right decisions in relation to applications. Yes, we need radical reform, as the Prime Minister said, but not in the way he describes. I have absolutely no confidence that the government's reforms will benefit anyone other than development corporations. The proposals that are being put forward in this white paper would lead to central government imposed mandatory top-down housing numbers, which local authorities will have no choice but to accept. In the new growth and renewal zones, developers will automatically get outline planning permission. Local plans will no longer have development management policies, so planning applications in our area will only be judged against national policy. Our only option to shape this process will be a 6-week consultation window every 5 years to comment on zoning and design codes. If you miss those, then you have no say. That's a massive reduction in residents' availability to influence decisions affecting their neighbourhoods. Permitted development rights means many other changes will happen without the need for planning permission and therefore without public scrutiny. The white paper proposal also runs the risk that councillors and councils will have a cop-out when it comes to explaining to local residents why undesirable, unsustainable developments are being built in their areas. So whilst I don't agree with a large number of planning decisions approved by this council, they are approved by local councillors, and nosy residents have the objection to hold those members to account at election time. This, Mr Mayor, is democracy, and whilst it might not be a perfect way of doing things, it's certainly better than what's being suggested in the government white paper, and so for this reason I'm happy to support the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Gemma, are there further questions, members?
Yes, Mr Mayor, Councillor Cashman wishes to speak.
Thanks, Gemma. Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just to echo what Councillor Taylor said, I couldn't have put it better myself, really, and a lot of those points that he's covered is something that I would like to mention myself as well. Mr Mayor, just before I add my support to this notice of motion, I just wanted to point out the lack of a listening ear that this council showed over the local plan when we were first going to residents regarding the uptake of that plan. So this council should also take responsibility for bypassing local views at that level as well. Other than that, Mr Mayor, I fully welcome this notice of motion and join wholeheartedly in the criticism of the government's white paper and their approach. I believe that any attempt to take decision making away from a local level, particularly in terms of planning, is disgraceful. As we all know, the types of decisions can be right or wrong for communities based on the smallest of details, and they can also shape the future of communities significantly. So the people best placed to make those decisions are local councillors who live in those communities. And just lastly, Mr Mayor, I would just add that the government white paper is indeed contradictory to the government's own devolution agenda. So I hope that we will be working closely with the Metro Mayor and the City Region to stress that point to the government. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Cashman. Gemma, any further questions from elected members?
Yes, Councillor Harvey, please.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just say that it really is refreshing tonight to see all parties on this council for the second time in complete agreement on a notice of motion. And I'm really pleased that it is a notice of motion put forward by the Majority Labour Group. I'd just like to add that one thing that the last few months has made clear is that effective local democracy is vital to running the country in the interests of residents. One size really does not fit all. Local planning, not national planning, is the only way to take account of local interests. I fully support this notice of motion, and I recommend that we all get behind it and do everything we can to make sure that in Knowsley our voice is heard. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Harvey. Again, Gemma, any further questions from elected members?
There aren't. And before we proceed, could I just ask Councillor Taylor to put his hand down, please, just before we move to the next stage? Thank you.
Thank you, Gemma. Councillor Brennan, would you like to respond before I put the motion to the vote?
All I'd like to say is, everyone, in terms of what we're looking at this motion to, ask people to, support this motion in terms of what's on the order paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Colleagues, that motion has been moved and seconded. Are there any objections?
There's no objections, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma. Would anybody like to abstain?
There's nobody abstaining, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Gemma. On that basis, the motion is carried. And finally, colleagues, moving on to item number 9, any other items? Colleagues, there are no further items of business. Can I thank you for your attendance, and I declare this meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Good night.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.